This is part 7 of our carbon fiber cowl, and we're going to paint the trim on today, put the final clear, and hopefully get a look at the final part. And there'll be one more step to it, buffing it out and installing it. Now, as we come down a home stretch on this project, I know a lot of people are thinking, wow, this took a lot of videos to do, but I tried not to leave out any steps. And today the steps are critical. Because normally, and in some cases, you would paint, again, you would paint the part, put the trim on, and then put the clear on. Well, we did it a little bit different. And you can vary that a little bit. I put clear on, now I'm putting the trim on, and I'm going to put more clear on for two reasons. I want extra clear on this part. It takes a beating from being on a motorcycle. And I wanted to see how that trim, it's a super critical thing to me, as the things I've designed, model planes and paint jobs and, well, this bike for instance. To me, getting that right is such a critical step. I think we spent our time in the last session getting it right. Today we need to execute it, get it painted, get the clear on, and we got what looks like a perfect 50 to 55 degree day for doing this. So the part has been up by the heating vent for over 2 days now. That should mean the paint is totally cured. Now normally I would put the trim on before I put any clear on. But in this case, I wanted to get some clear on because I wanted to lay out the trim and see it in real life. And it's just one of those things, you could do it either way, doesn't really matter. So on the previous video, we got our final shape and how we're going to do the trim. Now it's just a question of we want to get the whole part sanded out. Probably 2000 or 1500, get a rough etch on it, and then I could lay out the trim and do the final clear. I'm going to mix up a little batch of warm water with a few drops of Dawn dish detergent in it. Now I'll usually start with 2000 grit, but if this isn't cutting the way I want, I'll just switch over to 1500. Usually 2000 grit would put a nice, get rid of all the little defects, all the little dust and everything that's in the part. And when we'd be ready to lay out the trim. Now, because we paint outside, we always have to deal with little imperfections in the paint, dust and whatever. And the day we did the clear, the wind was blowing. But this will be an easy sand out once this is done, and we'll be able to lay out the trim. And we want to get rid of all of these little imperfections. I want it to be perfectly flat before we lay out the trim. Now, as with all the tutorial videos on painting that I post, I want to show the initial step, the sanding with 2000 grit in real time. Yes, this may get a little boring. It's a couple of minutes of sanding, but I want to show in real time, not with camera cuts, what it takes to go from the clear that has dried for 2 days and has a lot of little dust imperfections, little tiny fish eyes, pin-sized little imperfections. And I want to show what it takes to get from that to where it's flat. Now, I always start with a soft block. I want to do one section, bring it up to flat. I want the whole thing to be flat with no moon craters, no little imperfections, and it's easier. All of the parts that are flat, I like to do with a block. I want to avoid the edges at all costs, because if I were to take that sanding block and go up on that rib, what'll happen is I'll go right through the paint, or on the edge. Right now, the paint only has just a few coats of clear, and they're very thin. So I want to dry this off and show. You can figure out in your own mind. This is a real-time demonstration, and it shows how to go from where we are, where all the little imperfections, to where the part is totally flat. You can see how that is. And this is the part that when somebody's in the shop learning how to paint, it takes time to get a feel for these little imperfections when they're in the final paint, and sanding it out. A lot of people do not like sanding, or they're bored by it. I know that if I spend a half hour on that part, it'll be as flat as I can make it. And when I go on to the next step, now doing the little rib, I don't want to go to any of the pointed, sharp edges on this. And once I get the second side done, you can basically just look at this and you can see the whole part is as flat as I can possibly get it,
and we're ready to go on to taping. So we're ready to backmask, and assuming we have some fresh tape. Now, a fine line tape and painter's tape, low tack painter's tape. Low tack leaves less residue on the part. Now, so I try to make 2 center lines, and they're not going down the middle of the part. This would determine how far to the edge of the part the trim is going to go, and that's why it was important to make up the pattern. Now, I know people, and I've done it myself, that can do this all by eye, and yeah, and it comes out pretty good. And I've done it too that way. But by doing it this way, measuring everything and checking everything, looking at, I have a center line, which is that rib going down the middle of the part. So I can measure from that center line out at on any parallel line, and see, I can move it a little bit. Now, by eye, yeah, a lot of times it looks good by eye, and then you measure it, and it's off just enough that's, but this is the kind of thing, if you're fussy about it, and I just take a piece of paper, put a dot on it, and see where that is. Is it the same distance from both sides? You obviously could do it with a ruler. A piece of paper is just as easy, and it bends. That's the nice thing about the paper. Now, I can take the patterns that we made on the previous video, and these are made so that we have a left side and a right side, and I can, again, just like I did yesterday, see what they're going to look like in real life, and I can still change my mind. If I decide I'm going to make this a little different, or I want to just abandon it and go put something else there, it really is nice to have choices. And the little chopped diamond piece that's in the front that defines the MT09, I have that little piece cut separately so I can make sure it's perfect. So the next step is I have to reattach the handle with the Harbor Freight CA super glue, and that's been working pretty good, by the way. That's the first time I've used it on a job like this. I get out some foil wrap. Now, I do my backmasking with tin foil. Thanks to Walt Prey, who's passed away years ago, but before he did, he shared that technology with us when we were building model planes. I think it's used far and wide in the world of model planes, but it's always useful, and I'll show why in 1 minute when we go to do the center part of the backmasking. It's a lot easier than cutting up paper, magazines, or whatever, and I rub the tape on my shirt so I don't have the tape ultra sticky, even though this is low tack tape. This is fresh paint. It's only a day or two old. I don't want to take a chance on pulling up paint. Now you can see here we have the little ribbon here. It takes the imprint, and it gives me a map where to cut, and I can get right in there and cut. It's just as easy as pie. When you have that, that makes that middle piece of backmasking just as easy as pie to get in place. And what happens here, though, no matter how you do this, it's just a little bit of a labor of love to get this backmask nice and get all the corners pressed down, and just rub it up on a shirt. That's another good tip. And getting that to lay up against the 1/8 inch fine line tape, I want as little of the tape touching the paint as possible. Now, using your fingernail to get down in the corners, the fine line tape, if you don't do that, it tends to bleed down in the corners. And I do that again just before I take the part out to paint it, to spray it. Now, I've got the paint mixed up. The gun is ready. And the last time I'll wipe this, not soak it, just wipe it with some Sikkens M600. And at the very last thing, tack rag it down, bleed the compressor, and we're ready to go. Now, because I want to have the paint edges thin, I don't want to put any more paint on than I have to cover. So I've made the gun set like a big airbrush, dry coats, and painting 90 degrees straight down at the tape so it tends not to walk its way up under the tape. Fine line tape is really good, but I want to always stack the deck totally in my favor in this case. Now, I have the part drying up by a heating vent here, and I want to get a hair dryer, and I want, anytime I'm going to pull the tape, it's going to sit up by the vent for at least an hour. And I've heard you can pull the tape in 2 minutes later, and I've heard to let it sit overnight, but an hour is usually good with modern paint. With Brodak or any kind of butyrate dope, I like to let it sit overnight. Modern paint, a little bit different. But anyway, that's just good information from somebody who I like to have the paint edges nice and crisp. And you don't dare for all the money in the world sand that silver now. Oh, if you touch that silver with your fingernail, it's going to leave a scratch. And if you sand it, you're going to repaint it. So at this point now, I'm real happy the way this is coming up. We are getting ready. I'm getting the mask ready. Get out the clear, mix up the clear, and we will be ready. This is the part of the job that's really fun to watch, to see how this is going to be shiny very soon. Now, I've used the COWL clear. I've used 4 or 5 different other brands of clear, and I don't see a lot of difference between any of them. There may be, if you're a professional, you're painting a car or something, that there's some advantage. But the real thing is to use the fast hardener. That's the part of the job that, for my shop conditions, I want that paint to dry as fast as possible. I don't care about if it dries glossy at all, because I'm going to sand and buff it out. But again, for my shop conditions, fast hardener, it's a 4-to-1 mix. Don't talk while you're, or get confused and make it 6-to-1 or something. And I always stir it. I don't know if this is the total truth for COWL or for some, but I've heard the body shop guy tell me several times, don't use a wooden stick to stir urethane. It can pull some of the chemical out of the hardener. And our wonderful Harbor Freight guns, and they are inexpensive, but they do tend to leak at the cap, so I put tape on. Now, the temperature is about 60 degrees, so I want to get the first coat on light. I don't want to have a big run in the first coat. And I find, and it's just me, I like to put on a lot of light coats. I don't do it like I'm painting a car. Everybody I know that's a professional has a different spray technique. I know people that can paint this part in 30 seconds, blow it on like it's coming out of a mop. I like to take my time, and I want to see it at the end. I don't want to see any runs or anything in there I don't like. So, a half an hour or so, have a cup of coffee with Karen, and I don't like to rush this. I want that first coat to be just sticky like flypaper, so there's no chance it's going to run. I open up, I guess you just saw, open up about a 1/4 of a turn on the clear gun, and second coat will go on a little bit thicker. It'll be a little bit glossier. I don't need it to be glossy. The one thing I don't need is that it's going to be glossy. When you try to make it too glossy along the way, what tends to happen is you wind up getting runs. Now, this paint was custom mixed by Dennis at Gavin's, and it has got pearl and iridescent, and it's just a beautiful, in real life, it really sparkles out in the bright sun. I don't know if it comes across in the video as being the same color as it is in real life, but looking at it in the sun, it really looks nice. Now, the final thing, an hour, 45 minutes later, I want to get on the final coat of clear. This will have a little bit of a nice gloss to it, but again, even if it doesn't, it's not a big deal. It's not something that I care about. What matters now is once this last coat is on, I want to leave it out in the sun, look at it for about 10 minutes, make sure I don't have any chance I'm going to get any defects in it or any runs, and then put it away for 2 days up by a heating vent to dry. And once that's done, I'm good to go. And by day's end, I just couldn't be happier. I put it out in the sun. I babysat it. This is about as good as it gets. That part is going to be jewelry when I actually install it on the motorcycle.
Now, once this part gases off, which is about 45 minutes to an hour in 60-degree temperature, what we're going to do, this is going to go up by a heating vent for 2, maybe 3 days. I want this paint to be totally cured before we buff it out and install it on the bike. This has been a long set of videos, but I think when you look at this part, I just can't imagine that. And the fact that you can do it yourself and you can customize it to make any shape, size, fit any bike. And once you learn the basic skills, the door is open to making a lot of cool stuff. And I hope you really did enjoy this video and all the ones that are on our channel.
So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit the like button if you did, and thank you so much for watching.